Greetings! I'm here today with a laptop that you guys have not seen in a very long time. This is the Acer Travelmate 233LC laptop computer from 2003. This laptop was given to me by a family friend. She had used it regularly ever since she bought it new, right up until she gave it to me. So she used it for like, 2003, 2011. She used it for 8 years before she gave it to me. So this thing did some pretty good service. However, she took excellent care of it. She basically kept this thing on her desk for its entire life. She hardly ever used it on the battery. So as a result, the battery was in excellent shape when I got it. And physically, the computer was also in great shape when I got it. Now, because you probably don't remember, I'll give the specs of this laptop. It has an Intel Celeron running at 2 GHz. It's a Pentium 4 based Celeron, Northwood core. It originally had 256 megabytes of RAM. I maxed it out to a gigabyte. And it's got a 30 gigabyte IDE hard drive. And it's also got a CDRW and DVD-ROM drive. It's got a floppy disk drive, which is always excellent. And you got your sound ports there with an analog volume control, which is, again, very excellent. I love features like that. It's got a single PCM CIA slot. Looks like two of them, but it's just got the one. And then on the back, we got the cooling vent, monitor port. We have built-in Ethernet and a modem. 2 USB ports, I think they're USB 2.0. And a parallel port, which is again very nice. A very legacy compatible computer, of course, 2003, you'd expect it to be. Now, I'll open it up here. Now, if I remember right, I only ever made one video of this laptop, and it was the video introducing it. I made in August of 2011, I uploaded it in October of 2011, so it's been a terribly long time. Now, I'll tell you guys why you have not seen this laptop since then. I think this happened a good many months after I uploaded that video, but if you ever watched that video, or if you remember what I said in it, you may know that this laptop ran hot as hell. That Pentium 4 based processor got so hot, the cooling in this laptop is inadequate for the processor that's in it, and it got immensely hot. You could not put this thing on a fabric surface or on your legs or whatever because it would burn. And even on a hard surface like a tile floor, you know, under regular use, the processor would get up to 60, 65 degrees Celsius. And the bottom, right around this area, would absolutely burn. I mean, I'm surprised the plastic's still intact, that the heat hasn't destroyed it. And this thing got incredibly hot. And I have compressed air all the time. I use it a lot to clean out computers and stuff, dust and such. And I had taken compressed air to the vent here and to the inlet vent here. And because I knew there was dust in it, I could see dust through the vents here, and it just wouldn't come out. The holes were just too small, the dust would just get stuck in there. And you know, there was enough dust in there that barely any air came out at all. The fan would be running at its highest speed, and you would just barely feel air coming out of it. This thing was bad. And a Pentium 4 combined with clogged air vents only means disaster. So, what I did was, I found a service manual online. I was going to read up on how to disassemble this enough that I could get the cooling fan out and clean everything out. And you can find the service manual for the Travelmate 230 and 280 series online. They're the same laptop. If I remember right, the only difference is the 280 has a full-blown Pentium 4, whereas the 230 has a Celeron. So I found the service manual online and I followed it, and it was actually pretty easy to disassemble this thing to get the cooling fan out, and everything went smoothly and I got the cooling fan out, but I was going to unplug the cooling fan from the motherboard, just a little connector to plug it into the motherboard, and that's where all hell broke loose. I could not get the cooling fan connector out, and when I pulled up on the connector, the entire plug ripped from the motherboard. It just ripped clean from the solder joints. and it all went to hell from there. Yeah, I guess the heat or whatever made the plug on the fan wires adhere to the plug on the motherboard pretty hard. Although probably one of the most annoying parts was that after the horrifying event of ripping the motherboard connector right out of the motherboard, the connector just slid out of it just like butter. I don't get it. And I'm pretty sure I wasn't, pulling on the wrong part or something. But at any rate, I had ripped the fan connector out of the motherboard. And that was a problem because I could not get it back on. At that time, I did not know how to solder. And that pretty much spelled curtains for this thing. You could turn it on, you could use it, but you could only run it for about 10 minutes before the processor hit 65 degrees. And you had to shut it off unless you wanted to burn it up. I don't know if this has overheat protection or not, but I never tried to find out anyhow. Anyway, I did get the dust cleaned out. There was a fair bit of dust if I remember right, but of course it didn't matter anyway because I tore the flippin' connector out of the motherboard. And so, this thing sat dormant under my bed for, I guess a year and a half or so. Just yesterday, I decided to man up, dig this thing out, and see what I could do about soldering the fan connector back on. The fan connector is a surface mount component, meaning that it's just the 3 wires for the fan. There's just 3 solder pads on the motherboard. It's not holes, it's just pads of metal on the motherboard. And the connector rests on those pads where they were soldered. So, I couldn't just take the motherboard out, line up the pins of the fan connector through the holes and then solder on the other side of the motherboard, because there were no holes, there were no pins. It just rested on the motherboard against the solder pads. But luckily, the solder pads on the connector stuck out slightly, so when it was resting on the motherboard, the 3 pins that connect to it stuck out by about 1 millimeter, so I could put the connector on the motherboard and solder it back in place. So I decided yesterday to get out my soldering iron and see what I could do. Now, it was quite a difficult process because the connector was very small and the solder pads were even smaller. I had absolutely no space to work with. I'll show you some pictures here. Here's the CPU fan and you can see the connector on it. And there's the solder pads on the motherboard with a Canadian dime for scale. They were absolutely, positively, horribly tiny. And they were all I had to work with. Those other 2 bigger metal pads you see there, they were just, to keep the connector steady in place. I had to be absolutely intricate in attempting this repair because everything was absolutely so tiny. I mean, the head of my soldering iron was like 10 times the size of one of those solder pads. It was the worst solder job I've ever had to do. That, and I've got the shakiest hands on the planet, doesn't help as well. But excellent news, of course. As you may guess, since I'm making this video, I was successful. I successfully soldered the fan connector back on the motherboard. It seems that when you have to work with something really tiny, the shaking of your hands is amplified so much. My hands were shaking so bad, and the iron was moving back and forth across what seemed like an inch of the motherboard. But I did get it done. Because everything was so small, I couldn't solder it the normal way you're supposed to solder by heating the joint and then touching the solder to it. What I had to do was melt solder right onto the head of the iron and then touch the iron to the pads to get it done. And when I did that, the first time I did it, the solder just bridged across all 3 of the solder pads, which was no good. So what I had to do was I had to take the tip of the iron and scrape it along the motherboard until the bridge went away, so they weren't all soldered together. But anyway, I got it done. The fan in this thing is working again. Unfortunately, where there was a year and a half between when I broke this thing and yesterday when I fixed it, and I never put this thing back together fully after I broke it, I lost the screws that were supposed to do it. So I had to find some random screws that would fit. That screw there, that's not supposed to be like that. There's a smaller black screw that's supposed to be there, but it seems to work okay. That screw might or might not be original. That hole right there is where the cooling fan is. I could not find a screw to fit in that. However, there's a screw on the inside that I could find one that fits, so the cooling fan is secured in there. And as you can see, this happened the first time I ever took it apart, actually. Unfortunately, I just hate how plastic gets brittle when it gets old, because, you know, most consumer electronics are made of plastic, so older things like this, you know, they get awful brittle. You can see part of this plastic hinge cover here fell apart. There's a little tab that used to be there, so that unfortunately is gone, and now there's this gap here that you can see when I press up on it. This tab stayed intact, but I don't know. Oh yeah, you can see a little bit of crack there starting to form. That'll probably fall apart eventually. The plastic cover here isn't the only thing the screw holds together. The metal hinge, it holds it against the body of the laptop too. So it's not really a big problem. You can see a gap here too, which kind of sucks. But other than that, everything seems to be fine. I did have a problem at first with this. This cover here comes off, which you need to take off in order to take the keyboard off to get inside the laptop. At first, when I put it back together, this would pop up every time you went to open the laptop. But it doesn't. It seems to be okay now, so that's good. Oh, and one other side effect of this thing sitting for a year and a half, the battery has gone completely bad. I don't know why, because a year and a half ago when I last used this, the battery was fine. I got about an hour out of it per charge. Now it won't even charge, which is too bad. The electronic charging circuitry, where the battery voltage is probably 0, it probably won't even attempt to charge the battery. I've left this thing plugged in overnight. You can see the charge indicator's lit, and in Windows it indicates that it's charging, but it never moves above 0%, and the battery doesn't even get warm, doesn't show any sign that it's actually taking a charge, so that's too bad. I guess around Christmas time or something, if this thing's still working, I'll get another battery for it, because that'll be about 30 bucks to get a battery from China, and Lord knows if that battery will fit in the bay correctly, because of course when you take the battery out, it's got this cover on it that sits flush with the casing, so I hope if I get a replacement battery it fits okay. But this battery's still good, and I bet if I did some trickery like connecting it in parallel with another battery to give it a manual charge, I bet it would work again. But lithium ion is not something to toy around with. I'm not going to try any fancy tricks. So that's too bad. And there you'll see the charge light will come on again. There you go. So yeah, all that's left to do now is boot this thing up. So I'll turn it on. It's nice to hear that fan spinning up. This thing does run cooler now. Turn the lights behind me off. Whoops. Windows XP Home Edition. I used Home Edition because that's what the license key on the bottom's for. I'm going to be reinstalling Windows on this because I'm going to be upgrading the hard drive. It's got a 30 gig in it. That's the original hard drive. I have an 80 gig lying around that I'll stick in this, and it should make it a little bit faster. Don't need the extra space, but always like slightly faster hard drives whenever I can. And I'll probably reinstall this with XP Professional. And while we're talking about that, something, you know, videos I haven't filmed in a long time that I think were your guys' favorite videos were videos of different operating systems running on a computer. Operating systems that normally you wouldn't put on such a computer. I think good speakers. Older laptops always have better speakers than newer ones. I think my most popular video of a weird operating system running on a computer was Windows Vista running on the Compaq Presario 5360. And that thing was a very popular video of mine. But as you guys know, I don't really do those videos anymore. Instead of, you know, filming different operating systems running on a computer, most of my videos now are centered around reviews of electronic and electrical devices and such. But I'm entertaining the thought right now of seeing if I can install Windows 8 on this, and if I can, I will make a video of it running. So hopefully I can get that done, and I think you guys would like that. But as you can see, it works just fine now, and the CPU fan works. Oh, I got a speed fan here, so I don't know if after normal use this thing would still be safe to put on a fabric surface. It might still get too hot for that. But we'll open up speed fan here. This thing is you got to be just a little bit patient. It's all right, but it's not the fastest thing in the world. Amazingly, I haven't tested it for myself, but I read, according to tests online, the 2 gigahertz Celeron in this is actually slower than the 1 gigahertz Pentium 3 in the Desk Pro, which is really weird, and I would believe it because this thing is indeed slower than the Desk Pro. Yeah, battery stays at 0%. I mean, it shows as charging, but it never does. Still loading up background programs, I guess. It's not as slow as this usually. Oh, and it's loading speed fan. Mobile Intel Celeron 2 gigahertz, 1 gigabyte of RAM. Windows XP Home Edition, Service Pack 3, with about 1 million updates missing. There's our CPU, 40 degrees Celsius. The CPU fan is not running at the moment. Actually, before I broke this thing, I was actually using it. All I used this thing for was it sat under my bed running folding at home. And because I used to do folding at home, I don't anymore. But I used to do folding at home, and I folded for the YouTube team, and I was pretty high up on the YouTube team. But there's that anyhow. And I found about 4 gigabytes of personal files on this stuff from high school. I did use this laptop in high school throughout grade 12. That was before I got the ThinkPad, and this thing did excellent. Had to carry the AC adapter with me because the battery only lasted an hour, but other than that, it was fine. I wanted to upgrade the optical drive because, you know, it's got that CDRW DVD-ROM drive. I have a DVD-RW drive, an IDE drive, the one I saved out of that junk Toshiba laptop at school, and I wanted to put it in this, but the service manual didn't explain how to do that, and looking inside, it looks like I might have had to take this entire top of the case off, which, screw that, I'll stick with the drive. Free space, 12.1 gigabytes. I'm using quite a bit of space on this then. 15 gigabytes. I don't know what's on it. I guess all the programs. But yeah, there you go. So what I'm going to do is, I have a copy of Windows 8. I'll see if it'll install on this, and if so, that should be a pretty interesting video, seeing how Windows 8 runs on a 10-year-old laptop. This thing is 10 years old now. But there you go. And oh, I forget. I'm going to do this just because I'm curious. I have no clue what this thing has for video hardware in it. So let me see. I completely forget. Oh yeah, it's an Intel 845. Typical Pentium 4 chipset. Good chipset. There you go. So now I'll shut it down. I'm very glad this thing is working again, although I wish the battery hadn't gone kaput just from sitting. There we go. Also, before I go, one more thing to explain about this. When I took this thing apart initially to try and take out the fan, and I put it back together after breaking it, something weird happened. I don't know why this happened, but when you go to close it, you got to be careful, because somehow, I don't know how, the screen does not line up correctly with the rest of the laptop anymore. It's offset to the right. You can see there's a few millimeters of a gap there, but if you look over here, there's quite a bit more gap, and as a result, you got to be careful when you're closing it, because the hooks might not be lined up right. And I can open the screen and unlatch the hooks just by pressing on it, just like that. I didn't touch the unlatch at all. So it doesn't latch correctly anymore. I don't know how that happened, why it's offset like that, but I guess I won't worry too much about it. Like I said, this thing's starting to crumble apart. The same thing that happened to the Extensa. The plastic's starting to get old and weak. And that's unfortunate, because it seems to be happening to every old Acer laptop I own. But anyway, there's the Acer Travelmate 233LC. I almost killed this thing, but I saved it from an untimely death, so it gets to live for another little while at least. So there you go, and I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.